And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA Corporates and Investment Banking. ABSA is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025. Good evening. Welcome to the program. I'm Stephen Grootes. Lots to get through this evening. I was kind of not at all surprised to see some very angry words coming from the ANC National Executive Committee meeting over the weekend. And I'm not just talking about the fact they didn't like the venue or they wanted Coca-Cola and not Kingsley Cola, according to that Sunday Times lead story. I'm talking, of course, about the Monetary Policy Committee and their decision from the Reserve Bank to effectively give us a 3% inflation target. Well, more on that in just a moment. Both Gina Schoeman and Duma Gqubule, both of them on hold for you. We'll talk also in the next couple of moments about what we expect would be the job losses caused by the amount of clothing that is being sold in South Africa by Shein and Temu. I mean, one of the key questions to all of this is why are they able to make clothes for a cheaper price than us? And there are lots of very important answers to that question. Our labor laws are different. The way in which people work, the resources around us, all sorts of things are very, very different. But I think it's an important question. If we want to actually take them on, we have to know why that is. Now, look, I'm not convinced you get value for money if you buy cheaper things. And I think a lot of people are actually making the decision to spend money essentially on clothes made here because they know they'll last longer and over time the value is better. But if you've only got 30 Rand and you need to buy a T-shirt for your child, well, you don't have many options. And I think that is kind of what's happening. 25 minutes from now or so, a lot to come around Africa, the cost of capital in Africa. We're always talking about development projects in Africa, how much capital costs, and then, of course, the role that ratings agencies play in this. I wonder if you've ever done this, actually gone through your monthly or sort of annual bills, gone through your credit card perhaps, and worked out how much it really costs you over time to order food to be delivered to you. I mean, from the beginning of the pandemic and maybe a little bit before that, there's been an explosion in home delivery. I'm talking about your Mr. D's, your Uber Eats, things like that. And if you look at the hidden costs, and if you do it, say, twice or three or four or five or six or 10 times a month, the cost really adds up. Wendy Nola's been looking at that. I'm sure you have a view. I know you have a view on how much that's costing you or someone you know, or dare I say a younger person in your family. I'm sure they will be the culprit. I mean, some people sort of live like that. There's a famous sort of News 24 story years ago of, I think, Mr. D delivering the same thing to the same person as ordered for years. I mean, it was a pizza or something, the same kind. I mean, look, if you know what you like and you like what you know, why argue with it? But have you done the calculation, perhaps? And don't forget your extra special shapeshifter this evening, July in Ndlovu, an unbelievable career, starting in a very small Roman Catholic school outside Masvingo in Zimbabwe. I mean, he ended up studying at Columbia. I mean, there's a story there. July and Ndlovu, of course, the outgoing, I suppose now, I think I say the former CEO, I think that's right, of Thungela Resources. We're looking forward to meeting him and seeing him in our studio in about an hour and 17 minutes from now. Looking forward to your views tonight. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and 072 702 1702.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, the first signs of what I think is an inevitable pushback to the Reserve Bank's decision to aim for the lower end of the Monetary Policy Committee's inflation target. Those first signs coming through in the last 24 hours. Senior ANC figures, including the head of its Economic Transformation Committee, the Deputy Minister, Duma Gqubule, saying that the ANC's National Executive Committee was very angry with the bank's decision. Effectively now, our inflation target is 3%. Technically, of course, as you know, the decision should really be made by the Finance Minister, Kganyago. We start tonight with the economist at Citibank, Gina Schoeman. Gina, good evening. This kind of reaction was inevitable, but we have a situation now where the Reserve Bank Governor and the Finance Minister seem to have different views on a vital issue. What kind of signal does this send?
Good evening, Stephen. Wow, this is turning into quite a contentious issue in South Africa. So let me say that I think we all need to take a step back and agree, and I do believe that the finance minister and the governor do agree on one thing, is that high inflation for South Africa will stop it from being able to grow. High inflation or too high inflation will stop consumers from being able to spend, but particularly your lower income consumers, because they are far more vulnerable to inflation than they are to interest rates. However, we've heard the governor since 2021 talk about the virtue of targeting something lower than 4.5%. Now, there wasn't a formal change to the inflation target if you think about it. The range still sits at 3 to 6%, and that's what's written into the Constitution, protect the currency, and according to all the documentation, there's a 3 to 6% range. Prior to the current governor, we had governors who preferred to target numbers just below 6, and when Lesetja Kganyago came in, sometime into his first term, he said, well, 4.5% makes more sense to us. We think lower inflation is beneficial to the economy. And I do believe he's absolutely right. Lower inflation is beneficial to an economy, particularly when you have so many low-income consumers. The thing now, however, is that they've just changed their preference. Instead of targeting the middle of that official range, they now want to target the bottom. And where that becomes so complicated is what we see almost twofold. Firstly, you've got the fact that generally people are worried that if you aren't able to achieve the inflation target that the South Africa Reserve Bank sets, they're known to be hawkish, and they will then have to hike interest rates in order to achieve it. Hiking interest rates is something that no one really likes to see. It means your debt is more expensive, and naturally that's what generally people want to avoid. But I do think there is some misconception there. If you listen to the SARB, we do believe 3% is achievable over time, and they've said that they will be very tolerant of trying to get to this 3% over the next few years. But the second channel, which you've now asked about, is the decision-making, the politics behind all of this. And naturally, yes, I can understand how the finance minister would want to clarify the position of National Treasury in terms of who actually sets the inflation target, because he's probably being asked a heap from everyone that, well, we thought it was you that was supposed to make the announcement, and now he has to explain that they actually haven't officially changed the inflation target, and it's simply just a preference.
I suppose the argument could be from the Reserve Bank, we're giving the minister space to actually make the announcement. We're just preparing the ground a little bit.
Well, in a way, absolutely. I mean, they have been very transparent. And, the South Africa Reserve Bank is just known for being so transparent and independent and very vocal. And they said to us that there is a window of opportunity here where inflation is already at 3%. And if they start to target 3% with a view to only achieve it in the future, that they do it right now, the benefits that this economy will receive are so much more than if they try and do this at a later stage. But of course, we're going to have to wait and see. And I do think there is a window. We've heard from the finance minister. It's not as if we're going to get to the MTBPS later on this year and suddenly receive a new inflation target. It's not even a guarantee that we'll get there next February and receive a new inflation target. These things do take time, but we're told the work is being done, and we're told that there are merits in targeting lower inflation. The National Treasury's macro policy review from 2024 said inflation targeting works, and that there is merit to explore a lower target.
Gina Schoeman, thank you so much. Economist at Citibank. Listening to that, Duma Gqubule, an economist and research associate at the Social Policy Initiative. Duma, good evening. You have a very different view on this.
Yes, I think most South Africans agree that the governor was totally out of order. He unilaterally announced a new monetary policy, a 3% target, number one, and he's trying to bully South Africa and the government into accepting this 3% target. Now, right now it's irrelevant whether you think it's a good thing or the bad thing. Everywhere in the world, every central bank in the world does not have political or goal independence. Political or goal independence is set by democratic processes. Now, this central bank governor has decided to implement this 3% target without informing the president, without getting the approval of the cabinet, without getting approval of the other members of the GNU and the National Treasury. And I think that's totally out of court order. I don't understand why he's in such a rush. He must wait for the democratic process to play itself out. Yeah.
Okay, but Duma, if we've had, and as Gina reminds us, if we've had it has not always been the case that the Reserve Bank has targeted the midpoint of 3 to 6%. We've had people targeting and being very comfortable with inflation just below 6%. If someone were interpreted 3 to 6% as just below 6%, what's wrong with targeting, well, just above 3%? I mean, if it's good one way, it must be good the other.
Yeah, but it's not his call. It's for us to decide.
But it wasn't. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it wasn't the call of the previous Reserve Bank governor who tolerated higher inflation either. Is my point.
Yeah, but the point is there wasn't a debate at the time about introducing a new target, and to most South Africans, maybe it seemed reasonable, the mid-range of the target. Now you're going to the bottom of the target and setting effectively a new policy for the country, and it's none of his business. He must stay in his lane. Yeah.
Okay.
The second thing I want to say is that you know that if you look at the last 25 years, inflation targeting, I've looked at the whole 25 years. There's never been a situation where there's excess demand in the economy. Every single time when inflation goes up, it's got to do with things that are out of our control most of the time, supply-side shocks. And interest rates are quite frankly useless in terms of supply-side shocks. The inflation coming down now has got nothing to do with monetary policy settings. It's to do with supply-side shocks working themselves out of the system. So using interest rates, some people say it's a blunt tool. I say it's a totally useless tool in the sense that it's equivalent of prescribing water to address a broken leg. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I get that, but many other central banks adopted inflation targeting at roughly the same sort of time, from kind of the late 90s into the early 2000s. We were one of those, and inflation, until I suppose the pandemic, was kind of under control compared to the 1970s, for example, in most parts of the world, including here.
But there wasn't, the reason for inflation being under control was to do with the China factor. It's got nothing to do with most cases the monetary policy settings, and that's what happened. It was, China exporting cheap goods to the rest of the world. That was the biggest driver of the lower inflation. And this is my point. We learned during the pandemic when inflation went up and down throughout the world at exactly the same time. We peaked at the same time as the US a month later. And that shows that the drivers of inflation were not domestic during the pandemic. It's got to do with rising oil prices, exchange rates, and things that I've been talking about. So we need to revisit this whole issue of inflation targeting, in my view, because we've got a prime lending rate of 7.5% in an economy that's going to grow by less than 1% this year. What logic is that? It's one of the highest prime lending rates in the world, yeah.
Duma, thank you very much indeed. Duma Gqubule, an Economist and Research Associate at the Social Policy Initiative. Well, you've heard both from him and from Gina Schoeman, two sides of quite a complicated coin.
WhatsApp Stephen
on 072
702
1702.
Well, I'm sure you or someone you know, someone in your family is currently wearing a product that's been made by Shein or Temu. A suggestion today that if it goes on like this, we could actually lose around 34,000 jobs in our clothing industry. The study commissioned by the Localization Support Fund. Eustace Mashimbye is the CEO of Proudly SA. Eustace, good evening. I mean, we know these companies are producing clothes much more cheaply than our companies. Clearly, they're having quite an impact on our textile industry.
They definitely are, and I'm glad that we were able to get the Localization Support Fund. I mean, as proud as South African, we asked them to conduct the study so that we could all determine the impact of this on the economy. So the numbers are out. What you mentioned now in terms of the 34,000 jobs is what will potentially happen by 2030 if they keep going at the rate at which they are going. Currently, they already have taken up, about a third of the total online or e-commerce sales from South Africa. And they've done this in just about 5 years. And it took the other players about 13 years to get to where these two players are just in the last 4 years. So clearly their aggression is paying dividends for them. But not doing anything for our economy.
Okay, but I mean, we've also seen, I remember 5 years ago when this started thinking, my word, our textile industry's got like a year to go. What we saw instead was companies like the Foschini Group, there are others, they started designing, making clothes here quite cheaply, not as cheaply as the others, but very quickly. I mean, that was the big shift, of a higher quality than Shein and Temu. And haven't they been able to fight their way back into the market? That was certainly my understanding. Yes, Shein and Temu have taken market share, and they'll probably keep it. But we have seen South African producers actually kind of fighting their way back in.
No, definitely. I think, the social partners, being government, the organized labor and the unions, as well as the retailers, coming up with the retail clothing, textile, footwear, leather master plan has really helped, because those targets that are contained in the master plan is what everybody is working towards in terms of shifting what was previously ordered, especially in the East, to ordering it in factories in the country. That has really helped in terms of ensuring that those factories where, that have the capacity that is required, are given a chance to stay alive. Because once we lose that manufacturing capacity, it's gone, and at most times we can't get it back.
No, sure. I mean, Eustace, here's the bigger question, right? This is all about price. I mean, it is about the app gamification of buying, all of those things, but it is also about the price. We have people who are desperate. They're going to spend as little as they can. They need to spend money on food. They're going to find clothes where they can for their children. And that means that price matters. And Shein and Temu produce clothes more cheaply than we can. And this is the big question. Why is that?
So the big thing that we have seen with them, and the study touches on some of those aspects, is issues around economies of scale. It's issues around export subsidies. That these guys are exporters from wherever they are making these products. They're making the products themselves. And I think that's how you phrase it in your introduction. These guys are making the products that they're sending to all of these countries all over the world. And that's why when the study was done, comparison was done with some of the countries that we think are, at the same level in terms of the developmental agenda. And you can see some of them have banned these things from coming into their countries.
Okay, but I get all that, Eustace. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it doesn't answer the question. I mean, I would start my answer to the question in a couple of ways. One is our infrastructure doesn't work nearly as well as the infrastructure around them. Two, and this is an important and very complicated point, I don't think they pay their workers as much as we pay our workers. Now, I don't want lower salaries for people. At the same time, though, this is a reality. It's a race to the bottom.
No, but you see, the other challenge that we must not ignore is the fact that we can't advocate for low labor rates similar to what they have.
Sure.
I mean, some of these things are made in sweatshops. I mean, the ILO has reports on this in terms of the kind of working conditions in which these products are made. So we can't compete when it comes to that. What we can try and do is, without going the aggressive route of saying they must not come in like they've done in other countries, is to ramp up our efforts of getting South Africans to be able to access locally made products. Hence, the introduction of an online store by Proudly South African on the Shop Proudly SA. Increase accessibility of locally made products. Make sure that consumers know that they can go to places where they can find products for all spheres of society and for all sectors, depending on which tier of products you want to buy. If you want to go the lower segment, you will go lower segment. It might not be as cheap as Shein and Temu, but you don't have to buy it and replace it next week, because the quality is so bad that you can't even wear it. Because those are some of the things that came out of the study. So there are other considerations that have to be made, including by consumers when they buy on these platforms.
Eustace, thanks very much indeed. Eustace Mashimbye is the CEO of Proudly SA.
The Money Show.
The Markets.
Chris Stewart's portfolio manager at 91. Chris, good evening. Results out from Glencore, and one of the many companies, particularly a mining company, that's been hit quite hard by, well, everything that's been going on. I'm talking geopolitically in particular.
Yeah, good evening, Stephen. Yeah, Glencore, they had a production report out. I think we talked about that a week or two ago. This is their earnings numbers for the first half. A little bit light of market expectations, although they've reiterated their full-year guidance. They've been hit by lower coal prices and some production problems in their copper business in particular. They are reiterating their guidance for the year, but they've got a lot to do in the second half. And I think, the earnings miss here giving the market a little bit of cause for concern, but also importantly announcing today that although they'd been looking to move their listing out of London, and possibly moving a listing to the S&P in the US, which the market, I think it started to discount would be a better environment for them potentially to unlock value, particularly within their coal portfolio, which attracts continued ESG concerns, deciding not to move their listing, electing not to list on the S&P. I don't think they would have found their way into the index due to domicile reasons. That pushes the index funds away from them, and I think that was the key decision in not electing to move their listing.
And then Quilter, are their assets under management and administration up by 6%?
Yeah, I mean, what looks like a pretty good trading update out of Quilter, or first half results, should I say, beating where it matters, I guess. Assets under management, net flows, better than anticipated. Revenues perhaps a touch light of what the market was looking for, but it was a very, very choppy quarter. If you remember all that went on during the quarter, and they charged their fees based on average assets under management, and given Liberation Day histrionics from the market, we did see a very, very large drawdown during April, so it's quite possible that was the source of the small revenue miss, but a big beat on the cost front, and as a result of that, a good earnings beat, also indicating that the ongoing regulatory review is going well. They believe that the provisions they've taken for the regulatory review are at least adequate, and there may be opportunities for further capital distribution later in the year. So, the market taking the result in their stride, possibly the fairly guarded outlook for the second half, taking some of the shine out of what looked like a pretty decent result for the first half.
Chris Stewart, thanks so much. Portfolio manager at 91, bringing the time to just after 6:30.
Stephen Grootes
Taking your calls
on 011-883-0702.
Well, that is the number. Various comments coming through today on the Reserve Bank, on the Monetary Policy Committee. In fact, Dr. Len Konar got in touch. Dr. Konar, good evening. You were a director on the SARB, weren't you, some time ago? I think.
I have. Good evening, Stephen. I have the world record. I served for 24 years, and I chaired the audit committee for something like 19 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, thank you for getting in touch. I mean, you've been listening to these
with four different governors as well.
Okay, so we're going back a little bit, a lot of experience. I mean, your view on what the Reserve Bank Governor, the Monetary Policy Committee, the ANC, what they've all been saying about all of this?
Stephen, there are points of view that resonate with each of the commentators. Number one, it's highly desirable that we do have an inflation target, as Jerome Powell has done in the USA. And we've set the band between 3 and 6. And Lesetja Kganyago came forward and announced last week that 3% is the target. The Reserve Bank administratively reports to the Minister of Finance. Functionally, it has a board of directors. So from a protocol point of view, it needs to consult from time to time with the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Finance is in it, the GNU, so there are a number of parties that he would need to liaise with. But if you look at the overall intent, is it highly desirable that we should target a lower inflation rate? And the answer to that is an unequivocal no. We should go out there. It's an unequivocal yes. We should go out there and target this lower interest rates, steady. The mandate, as far as the Reserve Bank is concerned, is to protect the value of the currency. I've heard Duma Gqubule, I've heard Gina Schoeman. All of them have points of view. But in the end, if one looks at the community and 62 million South Africans, we have pensioners and retirement funds that prefer higher interest rates, consumers that prefer lower interest rates. So by us following this and targeting an inflation rate, we are trying to ensure that we have consumerism, we have a steady currency. You've seen the balance of trade and the volatilities within the currency. So my considered view is maybe the announcement by the governor should have taken place after consultation with the Minister of Finance. But is this injurious to anyone? Does this, step out of line with the target? And the answer to that is no. So we need to support the governor, support the independence of the Reserve Bank, and bring down inflation so that our currency will not depreciate on average by 6% per annum, as has been the case in the past 25 years.
Dr. Len Konop, thank you very much indeed for getting in touch. Good to hear from you, a former long-standing director of the South African Reserve Bank.
702. Stephen is on the Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, a suggestion from the CEO for Business and Commercial Banking at Standard Bank, Bill Blackie, that Africa is currently at an inflection point in terms of its development. Standard Bank holding the Financing Africa Forward Cost of Capital Summit today. Well, Bill Blackie on the line for you now. Bill, good evening. You suggest we're actually at an inflection point. Why do you believe that?
Stephen, thank you. It's wonderful to speak to you again tonight. Stephen, we've been growing our business across Africa for many, many years now. And we continue to see sustained growth and sustained returns from that investment. So we remain extremely positive about the growth of both South Africa and the rest of the continent. And that's why we do these initiatives and invest in these initiatives like Financing Africa Forward. This today was very much focused on our cost of capital in Africa. And there's a lot of data to show that actually in Africa, we pay disproportionately high interest rates for that capital that we need for infrastructure investment. So that's what we were bringing role players and stakeholders together to really start to get practical about how we deal that.
Public-private partnerships seem to be becoming more popular. I mean, is momentum building around those?
Absolutely. It's an absolutely essential part of the growth of the continent over the long run. Africa itself has got some savings capacity, but when you look at the infrastructure gap that we have at the moment and the potential that we can unlock if we can invest in that infrastructure, we absolutely need to crowd in capital from a range of different sources. And that's why public-private partnerships would be so important.
I mean, one of the major issues is strengthening government capacity. Governance weakness is a major problem. Are there certain changes that could improve governance or strengthen governance, to use a better word?
Without a doubt. I think consistently you see that improving across the continent. One of the great examples would be if you look at Kenya in this last period, where they went through a downgrade, then went through the process of articulating their strategy to the market at Marrakesh last year, and you saw a substantial uptick in the ratings of the country off the back of that. So there are many of these stories that we could share with yourself and your listeners.
Bill Blackie, thanks very much indeed, CEO of Business and Commercial Banking at the Standard Bank Group. Well, a major part of all of this is around credit ratings. And obviously, as you know, the better your rating, the cheaper your capital, the more development, the better the rating. Harry Doyne Ditmus is a speciality growth leader at Marsh Africa. Harry, good evening. We should ask how important sovereign credit ratings are in Africa. I mean, I remember how important it was when we were downgraded to sort of non-investment junk status. It was a few years ago. Looking back, it probably has had quite a big impact on us, and we're just one country in our continent.
Hi there. Thank you very much for having me on. Credit ratings are really important. They're made up of qualitative and quantitative measures and really measure a country's ability to service its debt. So, and there are various ingredients within that, whether it's the GDP, whether it's the size of the informal economy, its ability to collect tax, and its government debt. Of course, the better those measures, the more able that country is viewed to be able to service its debt and to be able to leverage debt in the international markets. Of course, the lower the credit rating, the less creditworthy that country is seen to be able to service its debt, and it's higher the cost of borrowing.
Have you seen other countries suffering when their credit rating is sort of downgraded? I mean, does it happen almost automatically? You can kind of, predict what's going to happen next, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, pension funds, banks, private equity funds all use credit ratings to set their strategies towards a country in terms of how much they want to lend and at what cost. And it impacts their internal limits and as I say, pricing. So systemically, they're well entrenched in the sort of global financial architecture. So a downgrade can, again, increase the cost of borrowing, and I mean, a country could even fall outside of risk appetite entirely, and so reduce the amount that country could invariably borrow to fund really important infrastructure projects or its sort of social strategies and what have you.
Does it affect other things? So, for example, insurance for a large-scale project. I mean, would that be affected by a ratings downgrade too?
Well, yes, but it's a sort of tertiary impact, I suppose. I mean, many countries across the continent are sub-investment grade, but from an insurance perspective, that means it's really critical for those lenders at a project level to have recourse for various insurable risks at a project level, whether it's to the construction of the project or the operation of it, to have recourse to well-rated insurers to make them whole for insured events to that project. And so it's critical that where there are lower rated countries, that there are well-rated insurers sitting behind often local insurers who are issuing these policies, which just means that it's sort of critical that that well-structured insurance policies sit behind, and well-rated insurers sit behind insurance protection for these infrastructure projects. But also, I suppose, one other angle of insurance as well that does support the flow of capital is insurance that the banks or the private equity funds take out to cover them against default of those loans to either governments or to projects directly, and whether that's default insurance to help them leverage more capital into those projects, or political risk insurance, and credit ratings influence the availability of those coverages.
Are some sectors hurt more than others when there's a downgrade? I mean, does mining or agriculture perhaps more vulnerable than other sectors?
So, yes. So projects that have or are dependent on governments or sub-sovereigns for payment streams or cash flows. So energy in particular, where there are government off-takers and so governments are required to pay for whatever is being produced, whether it's energy or whatever else. A downgrade can influence the credit risk of that project and the availability or appetite of developers and investors to fund those projects. And indeed the cost of delivering that project.
Harry Dooyen-Ditmas, the Speciality Growth Leader at Marsh Africa. Thanks very much.
WhatsApp Stephen
on 072
702
1702.
Well, we were talking about the Reserve Bank earlier and the Monetary Policy Committee, but we've also been talking about what you're literally wearing. I'm talking about clothes, the price of clothes, Shein and Temu, the impact that they're having. For some people, it means they have more choice than ever before in terms of what they wear. And I'm talking about people in our country, South Africans. For others, of course, they're sitting at home thinking, I might be working if it wasn't for them. Well, voice notes coming through tonight on 072 702 1702.
Hi, Stephen. I think a quick example, which will be simpler, would be to look at Apple, where it was more expensive to develop and assemble the Apple devices in the US compared to them being assembled in China. So it is a much cheaper alternative for that work to be done in China. So if you look at it, that means the labor in China is much cheaper compared to anywhere else in the world. Hence, the clothing that are brought from China, for example, for Shein and Temu, are much cheaper because of the labor, which is cheaper in that country.
Yeah, absolutely. You're entirely correct. It's a great example to point to, actually, with Apple. I mean, the other thing to just say is that India and China have the expertise, the people who can put lots of things together and create a production line that can do it, whereas I understand the US actually doesn't. Your thoughts tonight, 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. Absa is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025.
Well, just to sort of carry on the conversation around tariffs, and we're talking about Apple in relation to Shein and Temu, and Apple's problems are all because the US President Donald Trump is essentially, by kind of individual executive order, what's the word of the moment? Unilaterally deciding that he's going to do what he wants to do when it comes to trade. And there have been some developments on that, really, two fronts. First, the US President Donald Trump imposing a 25% tariff on all goods from India, which surely is going to impact the relationship between India and the United States. And for quite a while, they've actually been quite pally together. I mean, there's sort of complications, but they've been relatively pally together. The second is that our International Relations Minister, Ronald Lamola, confirming on X, following on from a post on X by a person called Masad Boulos, who is described as a senior advisor to Trump. And Lamola essentially saying, yes, we did have a conversation. Difficult to know at this stage if it involved tariffs. And I suppose that takes us to a question of who has Trump's ear, who's actually making the decisions. Well, he's clearly making the decisions, but who's influencing them? And that's quite complicated to actually know. I was pleased, though, to see that there is communication. I do think that that's very important. All right, coming up in the next half hour, more from Wendy Nola, your consumer ninja, on this issue of the cost of having food delivered to you. And what that amounts to. It can actually amount to quite a lot over a month. We'll also talk about tokenism. How do you make sure that your company is not getting involved in tokenism? So sort of true diversity, if you prefer. And then don't forget your extra special shapeshifter this evening, July and Lawville, the CEO, former CEO now at Thungela Resources, has some very interesting comments to make and has lived a very, very interesting life. Looking forward to all of that. Good evening. You're with The Money Show. It's 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. Absa is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025. Good evening. Lots coming up in the next little while. Don't forget, we'll be speaking to Advita Naidu from Jackhammer Global in just a moment. There's always this sort of lingering question when we talk about diversity of the issue of tokenism. I mean, how do you make sure it's not happening to you? How do you make sure a company is actually truly diverse? Things like that. Are there traps that people fall into? I mean, I think that's something we need to look at. Wendy Nola has been looking at the cost of, every month of how much it's costing you to have food delivered to your door. I mean, we all love it. I find it frustrating, actually, because it just takes so long. I'd rather get in a car and go and do it. But there are moments, family, children, people, etc., when actually it makes complete sense to just phone someone and say, please deliver food or whatever it is. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the next little while. And then don't forget your extra special shapeshifter tonight, July in Ndlovu. He was at Thungela Resources for a very long time, just finished his last month there. And of course, really a very, very interesting life story as well. So looking forward to that. And of course, hearing from you tonight.
WhatsApp Stephen
on 072
702
1702.
Well, a comment from Michelle on the WhatsApp line. Quite honestly, I think the people buying Shein and Temu clothes are not the low end of the consumer market, but rather middle-class people who like the convenience. That's actually a very interesting question. I know there was a time when people would say, no, man, we need to make sure that people have data and things like that. I think more and more that's becoming less of a problem. I think people have access to data or access to someone who does, if you see what I mean. So now I think that becomes less of an issue, and maybe that's one of the reasons we've seen such an explosion in sort of online sources of clothing, that more and more people actually have data, the ability to do it. And that means that Shein and Temu come in there. I mean, I must just say, more and more it is about the app, and it's not about the service or the cost to an extent. I mean, cost matters with clothing, of course it does, but about the app. And if you aren't able to compete on the app, well, then I don't know what's going to happen to you, frankly. I think that really is one of the major issues. Anyway, your thoughts, 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567.
The Money Show.
Business Unusual.
Business Unusual is 9 minutes after 7. Well, despite what might be happening publicly in corporate America, here, still huge demands for companies to show that they're committed to true diversity. It often doesn't come actually from government. I mean, in some ways it does. But what you really want to do is, if you operate in South Africa, you have a diverse set of customers, and you want to make sure your customers are reflected in your business. Otherwise, you're going to make, well, wrong decisions. Advita Naidu is the Africa MD at Jack Hammer Global. Advita, good evening. Welcome back. Do we find that there are sort of traps of tokenism, quite a strange phrase, that we see in corporate South Africa? Do we see some equality programs just making mistakes?
We do, I think, and obviously this is a really important issue to think about right now in terms of the fact that it's Women's Month. But yeah, tokenism, it's when the diversity is very visible but not actually powerful. And, you know, you think companies are actually just meeting these box ticking exercises. Women are being appointed to meet scorecards, but they're not really empowered to shift strategy or culture. And the thing is that it's insidious, or it's confusing because it wears the mask of progress. And you'll see the one woman on an all-male executive team or the single black female board member very publicly celebrated. But when you really scratch beneath the surface, the actual influence of her role may be limited. So I think there are companies that are falling into this tokenism trap where you get the same few women sitting on all the boards, or women are clustered into these so-called soft roles like HR or legal or marketing, and not in the P&L or strategic operational roles. And you can actually physically count how many women are in the room. And I'm not saying that there are no women in powerful roles. We do have 4 female CEOs in the JSE top 40. But there are some executives running business lines, but there's also evidence that the pipeline of female leadership is quite leaky.
Okay, so I mean, how do you know? I mean, sometimes a company can have worked quite hard at it, still made a few mistakes, but is clearly trying to sort of change things. And sometimes actually they're not interested. And it can be quite hard to work out it shouldn't be, but I do wonder if there are cases where there is a desire to change things, but things happen. I mean, staff get poached too.
This is true. And, you know, maybe they're moving to more progressive companies, but I think the impact will be felt where, you know, you do have a stronger pipeline of women coming in. You asked the question about whether equality programs are failing and they're getting it wrong. And I think the ways in which they get them wrong is they focus on the numerical representation, but not the actual in-baked cultural transformation of what inclusion means. I think a lot of companies assume that the burden of change lies with the women, and they focus on surface level things like confidence workshops and not actual systemic redesign of what it means to have women in top roles. And again, like I said, if you're, you know, concentrating women in the so-called softer roles or the group roles or the shared services roles, and you're not enabling them to run actual business roles, then that's a problem.
I've watched a conversation between a person who was perhaps promoted because of their color, with a person who actually did an MBA thesis on exactly that issue. It was fascinating to sort of watch the dynamics of that conversation. And doesn't that happen too? So companies come across a person, they want to hit diversity targets, they want to look a particular way. All of this is natural. They come across a person, and that person, and I've had people complain about this to me, and yes, I'm a white man, but I've had black people tell me this. They feel they get promoted too quickly. It's a strange thing, because you'd think, well, who gets promoted too quickly? Why would you complain about that? But actually, there are deep-seated problems there.
It does and it doesn't. I think we're talking about tokenism, but I think there are also very few companies who are going to put people in a core business role without the confidence that they're able to do the role. And I think they're probably also doing the candidates themselves and the rest of the organization a disservice by implying that a woman or a person of color is getting a role purely on the basis of demographic, because one, it engenders negative feelings in the rest of the organization, and two, it sets that person up for failure. So yes, there are instances where people do get promoted a little bit too quickly in our haste or our excitement to meet a diversity target without putting the proper support systems and fail-safes in place to make sure that that person is set up for success. But I don't think it's common that a person is getting a role purely because of their color. Yeah. So, I mean, or their gender. But that being said, yes, there are instances where this issue of tokenism comes into play, and we really have to understand what is tokenism and showcasing and what is true inclusion and diversity. Because like you said, I think there are companies who are committed to getting it right. They're just going about it in the wrong ways. And, you know, just as a couple of examples of things that they are doing, it's this performative allyship rather than real support. You know, all these companies right now are posting about Women's Month on LinkedIn, but are they interrogating what is essentially an all-male leadership team? They're sponsoring gender summits, but maintaining unequal pay bands. They're attending diversity workshops, but not actually speaking up about bias when it appears in their meetings. So what our point is that, yes, we know that there are companies who are committed to getting it right, but are they going about it in the right way?
How do you know if a workplace is properly inclusive with regard to female representation? And it can't just be the numbers. So we look to the numbers because that we can understand. Or 50%, 50 plus 1, whatever it is. Okay, that we get. But it goes so much deeper than that, and that's where it starts to get really complicated to try and actually conduct an assessment of a company culture, for example. And I mean, assessing culture doesn't rely on numbers, it relies on something else.
Exactly. And I think, you know, looking at numbers and representation, that's a bit of a cognitive shortcut. That's a measurable that companies want to focus on because you can put that up on a slide deck and it looks great, right? But true inclusion is more than just the numbers. It's the psychological safety where people feel that they can speak up without being labeled as emotional or difficult. It means equitable access to mentorship or sponsorship, and especially stretch opportunities. Are people being given the opportunity to work beyond what they're currently doing to grow into a role? And I think, especially where women are concerned, it's workplaces that are designed for real lives and what women are going through. They don't penalize pregnancy. They don't penalize menopause or caregiving. We know that the domestic load still falls mostly to women, but we're fixing the broken rung where women feel that they can't accede into leadership roles because they have to take a time out to focus on a domestic load.
Can men actually assess if their company is doing the right thing or the company they work for? Or is it something that only women can? Let me just explain where I'm going with this. A couple of years ago, I was at a workshop, involving a lot of companies and different people. And one male CEO stood up and gave a presentation that was... Advita, I mean, it was clearly put together in 5 minutes by his PA, right? Okay, there's no way to get around it. The guy after him, another guy, they both looked like me, if you know what I mean, they're both white men, talked to the audience in a way that, to me, seemed to show that he had a much deeper understanding. And I was watching the audience, and women were, as far as I could see, he was really speaking to them directly. They were nodding. You could see they really believed him. I thought that was very interesting. I mean, it's hard to sort of put all of that into words, but that was kind of my sense in the room. So what I'm trying to get to is, I don't know if men can really assess whether they're doing the right thing or not. Sometimes you actually have to ask the women who work with them.
You are absolutely right. But I think if we take a step back and think about the fact that, first of all, South African business culture is still pretty patriarchal in many ways. And if men do not actively dismantle the structures that benefit them, gender equality is is just going to stall at the policy level, because if we're seeing gender equity as a women's issue rather than a business imperative, then nobody's really going to address the problem. So male leaders who have this disproportionate power and access also hold the keys to change. They need to audit the system and not just the individuals. They need to be asking questions like, who is getting promoted and what is our pipeline? Who gets the stretch roles? Who gets the benefit of the doubt? They also need to sponsor women, especially women of color. And that doesn't just mean mentoring them, because women don't need mentors. They need allies. They need to refuse to participate in anything that's exclusionary. You know, those golf days, they still happen. The all-male panels, they still happen. Sexist banter still happens. And if men are not saying no to these things, that means that the power vests and remains vested in a select group of people. And allyship means calling out unfair processes, especially if they benefit just you. It means giving up space. You don't just invite a woman to the table. You move over and you give her space and you call out the bias, because true allies understand that gender equity is not about charity or guilt. It's about strategy and fairness and equity.
Advita Naidu, thank you. Africa MD at Jack Hammer Global.
The Money Show.
Consumer Ninja.
Wendy Nola, your consumer ninja, with us now, of course. Wendy, you've been looking at this issue. So, I mean, I see it happening all the time. And if you drive anywhere in the evening, you'll see so many people delivering food on motorbikes. It's incredibly convenient. It must be a little bit more expensive, though. And I wonder sometimes how much money we're spending on all of that. What have you been looking at?
Okay, so I have to say it was a bank's press release which prompted this discussion, which is quite unusual for me. But so as you say, those little motorbikes are not just foods that has been ordered from delivery apps such as Uber Eats and Mr. D, but also your grocery delivery. So we're not talking about grocery deliveries. We're talking here about people who want to eat, and then they go onto the app, click, and it. You know, there comes the little motorbike with their food. And what Standard Bank did during the course of last month, which is savings month or non-saving months for most South Africans, as it turns out, they took a look at what kinds of things their clients were routinely spending their money on. In other words, habits that if they tweak them a bit, because nobody wants to go cold turkey on anything, if they spent a little bit more mindfully, they could actually create a new habit of redirecting that money. And the two have to go hand in hand. You've got to just save, you've got to spend it mindfully, put it away into a fund, into an account for emergency spending, because it's not happening. Too many South Africans are saying they want to save for a rainy day, because we know through experience that rainy days happen, and they happen quite often, but it's actually not happening. So here is how the bank's head of money management and advisory, Dorette Eustace, put it.
So in the context of Savings Month, at Standard Bank, we want to have the conversation around practical ways, to free up cash flow and to actually get the money to save. So as part of this exercise, we looked at individual spending across different income categories and, categorized what people are spending on. So one of the things we looked at is subscriptions. Another thing we looked at is things like spending on takeaways and especially food delivery, etc. So really to have the conversation around, yes, we all know it's important to save, but how do I start practically doing it? And if we're saying times are tough and it's difficult, to save, what are some of the ideas that we can start sharing with individuals to say, maybe look at this? And it's not necessarily to say, stop spending on a certain item or certain category, but it's more to say, if you just take a bit of that money and you start redirecting it towards a savings account, what can the impact of that be? And how can you actually use that to kickstart your savings?
Okay, so that's what they wanted to do. What levels of sort of spending on food delivery apps did they actually find?
It was quite an eye-opener, Stephen, I have to say. First of all, more than 45% of their clients across the board have no accessible emergency savings at all. And then among private banking clients, earning between 25,000 and 58,000 a month, more than a third of them have no emergency savings at all either. So Eustace says we know that growing one's income isn't always easy because there are external factors we can't control. But obviously we can control what we're spending on takeaways, right?
You've got to control what you can control. Now, we can't make as much money as we want, but we only spend as much as we need to and want, I suppose.
Yeah, and, those of us whose work or home address is very well known to the Mr. D's and the Uber Eats drivers, the starting point would be to actually, let's look at it. Let's be mindful. What are we actually spending on these apps? And you don't have to do any maths. You just have to go into your order history on the app or apps, and it will tell you all. Standard Bank's data shows that customers spend on average 775 Rand a month on takeout and food delivery from 14 major fast food or quick service restaurants, as the industry calls them, QSR franchises. And as I said, that's not including groceries and supermarket meals. So it's the customers in the late 20s and 30s who are most guilty, in inverted commas, of this. They're hugely embracing it. This is the way to go. And the higher the income that they're earning, the more they spend. Those earning more than 60 or around 60,000 spend 1,000 Rand monthly, going up to around 1,300 a month during holidays. Lower to middle income earners, those earning under 20,000, spend 472 Rand. And those earning 25,000 a month, 615 Rand a month. That's a lot, Stephen.
So, I mean, it sort of edges up, right? You don't kind of realize how much you're spending on this because you never sit down and work out what it's costing you a month.
Well, that's the thing. I think that applies. And I mean, Dorothy used to mention subscriptions as well. We don't want to go into that here, but that's the other thing, that every month coming off your credit cards. And I think part of it, Stephen, is you're not handing over money. You're not handing over cash. It's not this conscious, okay, here's 68 Rand or whatever. It's all click done coming off your card, and I think that adds to it. And I just wanted to add something that bank press release didn't mention, and I think a lot of people don't actually realize, is that the food's not costing you extra over and above what you would pay if you ordered and collected yourself or went and ate inside one of those QSR places. It's not just the delivery fee of 20 Rand or whatever, but all the restaurants actually, according to News 24's report back in 2023, they investigated this quite in depth. And most national chains charge between 20% and 30% more for meals than what their menu prices are for normally. So that they add on their app costs for being on those apps to their customers. And that is a lot, 20 to 30%. Then you're paying delivery on top of it. And that's going to erode your bank account quite nicely if you're a regular.
Yeah, very quickly. Okay, so, I mean, do you just stop doing it automatically? Do you go cold turkey or do it another way?
I don't think cold turkey is a good thing. We're human beings are resistant to that. So don't order as often or reduce the cost of your takeaways. So don't pay the delivery fee. Don't pay the app markup price. Go and collect yourself or sit in the restaurant. It's this convenience click and there it comes on the scooter thing. That's taking away money that if we save the money, don't just save the money that, you put it away and have a goal or just, when your car breaks down and you've got to suddenly find 8,000 Rand. I mean, for most people, that'll set them back for months and they're borrowing here and that's more interest and it's a drama. So, if one of 2 or 3 fewer takeaway meals or not having the scooter come to your door, the trade-off is that you've got peace of mind and it isn't this emotional trauma when suddenly you need to find extra money that you don't have.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, in the end, basically, the moral of the story is, and this is something you learn when you leave your late 20s and early 30s, is that convenience costs.
Absolutely. So it's other forms of food as well. I mean, if you go into a supermarket, there's so many products on the shelves that are screaming, pick me because I'm quick and convenient. And we're all like, our lives are so busy. And look, let's do it the quickest, easiest way. All that convenience costs. So if you buy the instant oats instead of spending a whole 2 or 3 minutes cooking the oats the traditional way on the stove, it's going to cost you a lot more over time. The pre-cut and bagged veggies, oh great, so convenient. Rather than cutting your own butternut or whatever. All these purchase decisions might seem petty. The pre-cooked sauces, instead of just spending 2 minutes doing it yourself, they all add up. And all those habits collectively are what are some of the things that are stopping us, or, from being able to put a little bit away to help ourselves for when those inevitable dramas happen to us.
Wendy Knowler, thank you very much indeed. On speed dial and free delivery to your home of Wendy Knowler, your consumer ninja, every Wednesday evening. Wendy, thanks very much.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
Well, one of the people who's been part of corporate life, part, I suppose, of what you would call money show life, perhaps that was a small part of his life for quite a long time, played a big role in our mining industry, is July Ndlovu. And he's coming to the end of his time as the CEO at Thungela Resources. They're in a sort of transition period, and he will slowly be stepping off that stage. And I'm pleased to tell you that he's in our studio now. July, good evening. It's wonderful to meet you, and thank you for coming through and agreeing to be our shapeshifter tonight.
No, thank you so much for inviting me. Retiring is a good thing. I finally made it to the nerve center of 702 land. Thank you.
Well, we're very grateful that you came. Yeah. I think whenever the time I spent on Google looking and preparing for tonight, and I noticed you included it in your LinkedIn profile as well, is that you grew up in Gqubule, particular part of Zimbabwe. It's near Masvingo. If you look at it on a map, you went to a Roman Catholic school. They're still up. They're still going. They still have a website I saw today. What was that kind of community like at the time? I mean, Zimbabwe's changed a lot over the years.
Zimbabwe has been blessed with lots of mission schools. So all my schooling life was through mission schools. I went to Pakame for primary. Actually, Gqubule was a small part of my high school education. I went to Sarin Mission, one of the oldest missions in Zimbabwe, which was an Anglican mission. Then I went to Gqubule. And something quite significant happened at Gqubule because I met my wife. So we've been together for that long.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you think, so we talk about education all the time in South Africa. Was there something about the quality of that education that helped you along the path that maybe young people in many government schools here don't get anymore?
I hold the view that the Rhodesian government did one thing right for the black population of then Rhodesia in Zimbabwe. They never denied us quality education. We continue to get Cambridge education all the way into independence. And when Robert Mugabe came on, the two things that he prioritized, actually, if you think about it, was education and free health. And they built schools everywhere. But with very good quality education, and I think that set us up. And for people like me, who education was a ticket to changing your circumstance, I was really lucky to have been born where I was born.
I mean, I noticed that you spent some time at Columbia, and I was fascinated by this. I mean, Columbia's in the States. It's a big place. It's well known. It's fighting with Donald Trump. Everybody is. It's quite a journey from Gqubule to Columbia. I mean, did you ever, while you were there, look back and think, gosh, it started a long way away?
That part of the journey is an interesting one for a young person who grew up in the circumstances that I grew up. Because what tends to happen is you're never really sure how good you can be.
Yeah.
Until you get to a place like Columbia where you begin to mix with colleagues from all over the world. In fact, in my class, there were 40 of us from 34 different countries. And all of a sudden, you begin to understand what world-class leadership looks like. But secondly, you actually just realize, I belong. I can be just as good as the next guy. And I think it just gives you so much confidence and just liberates you to be yourself, to go out there and seek to be the best version, not of the next guy, not of Jack Welch, but of yourself.
You get away from the idea, well, I can only be as good as this place. And in fact, you become July Ndlovu.
The best version of July Ndlovu. And there's only one of you.
I like the way you put that.
Yeah.
You studied metallurgy. You studied the science of metal.
Yeah.
Was there something about mining that you wanted to do already by that stage, quite a young person?
Actually, interestingly, I tell my friends that I'm a failed medical student because I lasted one semester.
Longer than me.
And then what happened was somewhere along the way in that first semester, I met a guy called Harry Calver. He was a senior executive, technical director of Anglo-American Zimbabwe then. And he started talking about mining and the things that you can do in mining, the difference you can make for communities where they were actually mining, the role that metals and minerals actually play in the developmental story of humanity. I mean, I just felt, shucks, these guys are doing something really cool. It's different to actually spending time in a theater. So I just switched immediately. I'd found my passion.
Sure. And you enjoyed that immediately. I mean, you were studying. It's one thing to decide to do something. Now you're actually doing it. You're working in mining. Did you find that actually that passion stayed with you?
You know, I was lucky to work for an organization as big as Anglo-American because what it provided was such a varied experience. In fact, I've only worked for two organizations, Anglo-American and Tingela. But in reality, I worked in so many different places, so many different experiences. If you can imagine, I started in coal. I went to ferrochrome, from ferrochrome to nickel to PGMs, which I enjoyed thoroughly, and full circle back to coal. Different organizations. Although you're an Anglo-American, you're experiencing so many different things, so many different markets, so many different commodities, different challenges, and it just grows you as a human being.
So you spend a lot of time kind of in the science of mining, managing mining, and then at some point the kind of, I don't know, did leadership tap you on the shoulder? Did someone tap you on the shoulder? Was it quite a transition going from kind of science of mining to sort of leadership? I mean, when do you think you sort of first found yourself in a kind of leadership position?
Probably around about the mid-90s. I made leadership positions, first line management quite early in my career as a youngster. And at that point in time, obviously, you're full of yourself. You think you're the best, you know everything. In fact, you almost think the guys who promoted you don't know enough and you want to change everything. So I've been fortunate to be in leadership positions, probably for the greater part of my career. That transition, more often than not, is not something that you get prepared for. Because you train as an engineer, mostly as an individual contributor. In fact, we engineers think we are the smartest thing in any industry we go into. And all of a sudden, you're now being asked to get the best out of other people. And that's a transition just generally, both in mining and most manufacturing organizations, we don't prepare young people very well for.
What makes a good leader? And I suppose, you know, I could walk past any bookshop in any airport in the world and they would have a leadership section. And I often think, you know, maybe I've got it wrong, but there's just a lot of nonsense there. In your experience, I mean, you've been with some of the best leaders in the world, some of the best leadership teachings in the world. What works? I mean, I can think of certain things off the top of my head. Setting an example is one, is being decisive maybe another. What for you is the kind of key to it? Actually getting the best out of people? Because lots of people try and lead and they fail.
You know, you're so right. I mean, leadership is about followers. Sometimes we forget that to be a leader, you've got to have followers. But it also teaches you that, in fact, to be a leader yourself, you have to be a good follower. So this idea of taking people along with you, irrespective of what it is, and realizing that, in fact, people choose to follow you. There's not much you can do. It doesn't matter whether it's in politics or in business. Actually, when you stand in front of people with an idea that you want people to buy into, always remember that people are making a choice. Is this an idea that we're willing to give our very best to realize or not? So that's the first thing about leadership that I learned over the last 3 decades and a bit. The other one really about what makes good leaders is to realize what delivers difference. And it doesn't matter whether difference is in sport or in business, delivering good results. Actually, it's about realizing that we're not short of good ideas. In fact, you know what? You can hire a consulting organization, it could be McKinsey, and they'll give you brilliant ideas. But there's one thing they'll never give you, is how to translate those ideas into results. which is executing. And therefore, how do you build good teams that are complementary and willing to get together, to work together to deliver superior results, better than the next guy? Because in mining, if you think about it, generally we all are endowed with good resources. What differentiates the winner from the non-winner is how well we execute to deliver that value into the marketplace.
Is it about putting the right team together? Is it about, you talk about a vision? Is it about something else? I mean, clearly you've got to sell people on the idea, almost make them sort of, almost make them think it's not quite theirs, but give them ownership of it.
The idea of selling, this concept that we say you've got to sell the idea is important, but the idea itself must be compelling. But actually, that's not the biggest part of building winning teams. Building winning teams is about bringing together a group of people who can complement each other in a way that together they are better than the sum of the individual parts. And secondly, it's just about you as a leader realizing how do you surround yourself with people who are willing to go to war with you, who are willing to hold you on your shoulders, that they can buy so much into whatever simple idea that you've got, that not only do they support it, but they can actually build it into a much better idea. Because ultimately, if you think about it, I mean, we all think the most transformational leaders are the ones we've got these blinding insights and ideas. You do find the odd anomalies like Elon Musk. But most of us are just ordinary human beings who are able to orchestrate thousands of people who are willing to take sometimes ideas which are not well formed and just mold it into a winning formula.
Is leadership in Southern Africa harder than in other places? We have very diverse groups of people. Sometimes we argue with each other until someone from outside Southern Africa comes, and then we all fight together against that person, I sometimes think. But is leadership harder in Southern Africa than in other places?
Since I've now had the opportunity to have a business in Australia and we set a business in Dubai, I used to believe on this mantra that if you have worked in South Africa and Southern Africa, you probably have had the best training, and because it's quite tough to operate here. But the reality is actually you find every jurisdiction, every culture has its own challenges and differences. It's not about whether it's harder here or not. It's whether you're able to understand the local narrative and the belief systems that make people wake up day in, day out wanting to give their best. And your ability to harness that latent energy to make people give that extra discretionary effort. And it doesn't matter where it is.
Your extra special shapeshifter tonight is July Ndlovu, the CEO at Thungela Resources. He's with us for another 10 minutes.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. Absa is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
July Ndlovu, your special shapeshifter tonight, the CEO at Thungela Resources. You'll be pleased to hear, July, have some questions about mining. There was a time about 5 years ago when people started to get very excited about how the world was changing and moving away from coal. There's quite a strong environmental lobby in South Africa. We know, for example, what happens around Eskom's coal-fired power stations. Did you ever think, there are more and more ways to generate electricity. How long do you think we'll be using coal for?
Steve, do you want me to disappoint you or you want me to tell you the truth? Firstly, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, no one knows. But as you
no
see
one
the world,
really knows, other than to say that I think most people who have written the obituary for coal will be disappointed. Because the reality is, and if you go back, I've been talking about coal since 5 years, which is the window you're talking about. If you look at the emerging markets, Southeast Asia, Africa to some extent, where there's billions of people who still need to come out of energy poverty, into the kind of modern energy services that the first world actually experience. What they need is access to a reliable, affordable source of energy. This idea that they've got to have a choice, a binary choice of either fossil fuels, coal in particular, or renewables, for me, is a false choice.
Yeah.
I think these energy sources can coexist, and that certainly is what we're seeing. And China is a very good example. China is deploying renewables faster than anybody else combined on the globe today, and yet they're building new power stations. Is that reality that if you want to continue to drive economic prosperity, particularly in the emerging markets, you can't wish away this energy source that most people would love to hate?
No, sure. I mean, I get that. I do wonder if we're kind of at peak coal or very close to peak coal, and then usage will start to go down possibly quite quickly.
I think we probably are at peak coal, if you ask my opinion. Yeah. The decline is going to depend on a number of things. And I think what has slowed down decline is, in some instance, the activists have been their own worst enemies by exaggerating the extinction of humanity if we continue to use coal. That's one. But secondly, this idea of energy security has become a far more dominant issue in developing energy policy in a lot of countries. And you're beginning to see countries say, we can't rely firstly on a concentration of energy from one region and or only imported energy. Sure. And therefore, countries that have got coal within their own borders are beginning to develop that as a resource to secure their own energy sources going forward. And I think that is what is going to slow the decline from what it ordinarily would have been.
Mining in South Africa, I'm going to ask you a political question now, so prepare yourself. Mining in South Africa kind of it seems to me to be in a complicated space. It is always fighting with government. I thought that maybe those fights would come to a stop, but they haven't. Why do you think that is? I understand the idea that resource extraction is inherently political. Okay, by resource extraction, I'm talking about mining. Is it just the character of the current minister that's leading to all of these fights? Is there something else that's really driving these fights all the time? Because it's got to be better for everybody if there's a better relationship.
Firstly, I think I want to change the narrative that this disagreement between, or the tension between mining and mining industry and government and or communities is a South African feature. It's not. I see the same thing in Australia where we operate, that there's always tension between the mining industry and government, and we're always going to be lobbying for policies that actually allow us to deliver value the way we do. Part of it is actually a consequence of what we're extracting out of the ground. It is an endowment that is owned by nation states. And I think our role as business is to realize that we've got to do this not only for the benefit of our shareholders, but certainly to make sure that the people most affected by what we do, that have entrusted this natural endowment to us, are better off as a result of what we do. I accept that tension is never going to go away, but it's one, I think, if we just learn to listen to each other, we can manage a lot better. South Africa is, by its very nature, a very loud country. Sometimes our disagreements are a lot louder than actually the reality on the ground.
Do you think we can do better than we've done? Can we get on a little more easily, perhaps?
I think where we can get a lot better is not to focus more on our disagreements, but actually to focus on those things that we agree on, which is let's grow the mining industry. Let's ensure that investment continues to come into this country. Part of it, Stephen, is actually a consequence of where South Africa's policy dispensation comes from. Remember, actually, a lot of our politicians come out of the union movements. And they've got almost this innate zero-order belief that business cannot be trusted.
Yeah.
And as a result, that's what they bring to any conversation that we actually have. When in fact, we all share the same interest. Let's extract this resource economically for the betterment, not only for our shareholders, but actually for the people of this country too.
July, we've got literally a minute left. What do you do for fun? You've been running a big company. It's very stressful in a very stressful environment. Lots been going on around the world. How do you relieve that stress?
I've got lots of things I do, photography, I read a lot, and I've got lots of books I need to catch up on. And I've discovered golf.
Golf? I'm so sorry.
Wow. You should meet me a few months after this. Hopefully I've improved my handicap, and that's what I intend to do. Hopefully when I stop working and I wake up every day without a schedule, you see me on the golf course, standing in front of winding fairways, imagining what I could do to change this world just with a club.
I can hear you. You've retired in your head already. What kind of photography? Wildlife photography, sunsets?
I do all sorts.
Joburg's potholes.
I like macro photography. I like urban photography because you see fascinating things if you go into downtown.
Yeah,
that you can just capture and frame in that small frame. You find history. You find perspectives that you never knew existed.
July, it's been wonderful to have you here. Thank you very much indeed. July Ndlovu is, for a little while longer, the CEO at Thungela Resources.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. Absa is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025.
Well, before you go off and start thinking about golf courses and fairways and things, let me just remind you of what's happening about the markets in the US. They are trending up now. The Dow Jones is up 0.3%. The Nasdaq just up over 1%. And the S&P 500 up 0.73. So another positive day there. Don't forget Investment School tomorrow. And of course, so much going on at the moment. We saw that with Glencore's results a little earlier today. Been a very busy show, if I may just say. Always good to hear from you on The Money Show. We're back tomorrow. Good evening. It's 8 o'clock.